Here's something nobody tells you about getting older, and I wish someone had told me this 30 years ago. The people who stress you out the most, the ones who keep you up at night worrying, the ones who make your blood pressure spike every time your phone rings, they're not strangers. They're not your neighbors or coworkers or people on the news. They're sitting right across from you at Thanksgiving dinner. They're in your phone contacts. They're family. Now, before you think I've lost my mind, hear me out. I spent 40 years as a family therapist, and I've seen this pattern destroy more retirements than financial problems ever did. And recent medical research has proven something absolutely shocking. Toxic family relationships after 60 don't just make you unhappy, they literally shorten your lifespan. The American Heart Association published findings just last year showing that chronic stress from family conflict increases your risk of heart attack by 47%. 47%! That's not a small number. So today, we're going to identify the 6 types of family members who are secretly sabotaging your health after 60. And more importantly, I'm going to show you exactly how to protect yourself without destroying your family or feeling guilty about it. Because here's the truth that took me decades to learn. Loving your family and protecting your peace are not mutually exclusive. You can do both. And number 4 on this list, when I share it, you're going to immediately think of someone in your own family. I guarantee it.
Let's start with the family member who turns every minor inconvenience into a 5-alarm emergency. I call this person the crisis manufacturer. You know exactly who I'm talking about. Every phone call starts with a catastrophe. Every family gathering becomes a therapy session. Every text message feels like breaking news from a disaster zone. What makes this particularly dangerous after 60 is what scientists call the cortisol cascade. When you're constantly exposed to someone else's manufactured emergencies, your body doesn't know the difference between a real threat and an exaggerated one. Your adrenal glands release cortisol and adrenaline the same way they would if you were actually in danger. And when this happens repeatedly over months and years, your body stays in a perpetual state of fight or flight. Let me tell you what happened to one of my former clients, a woman named Patricia. She was 68, recently retired, looking forward to finally enjoying her mornings with coffee and crossword puzzles. But her daughter-in-law called her every single morning with a new crisis. The kids won't eat breakfast. The washing machine is making a noise. Her husband said something that upset her. On and on and on. Patricia told me she started getting chest pains every time her phone rang. Her doctor put her on blood pressure medication. She couldn't sleep. And here's the kicker. When Patricia finally set a boundary and limited those morning calls to once a week, her blood pressure dropped 20 points within a month. 20 points! Her doctor was stunned. The crisis manufacturer operates on a simple principle. Your attention is their oxygen. And they've learned over years, maybe decades, that creating chaos is the most reliable way to get that attention. But here's what you need to understand at this stage of your life. Every time you get pulled into someone else's manufactured drama, you're not just losing time, you're losing health. You're losing the peaceful retirement you worked 40 or 50 years to earn. So how do you handle the crisis manufacturer? You stop being their audience. You stop rewarding the behavior with immediate responses and lengthy conversations trying to fix their latest catastrophe. When they call with urgent news that isn't actually urgent, you can say something simple like, "That sounds stressful for you. I trust you'll figure it out." Then you change the subject or end the call. You're not being cruel. You're refusing to participate in a pattern that's literally harming your health.
Now let's talk about someone who might be even more dangerous to your retirement security. I call this person the financial parasite, though they'd never see themselves that way. This is the family member who's always just a little bit short, always between jobs, always recovering from some unfortunate circumstance that requires your financial rescue. Here's what makes this relationship particularly insidious after 60. You're no longer earning a regular paycheck. Every dollar you give away is a dollar you cannot replace. Your retirement savings represent your safety net, your medical care, your housing security, your ability to help yourself if something goes wrong. But the financial parasite doesn't think about your needs. They only think about their wants. I want to tell you about a man I knew named Robert. He was 72, a retired postal worker who'd saved carefully his entire career. He had a nephew, late 30s, who kept coming to him for loans. First, it was $3,000 for a business opportunity, then $2,000 for car repairs, then $500 here, $1,000 there. Robert kept a list, thinking his nephew would eventually pay him back. After 5 years, the total was over $40,000. $40,000. And you know how much came back? Zero. Not a dime. Meanwhile, Robert postponed the knee surgery he needed because he wasn't sure he could afford it anymore. What the financial parasite doesn't understand or chooses not to understand is that your generosity has limits, and those limits aren't about how much you love them. They're about basic survival and dignity. You have every right to enjoy the money you earned. You have every right to spend it on yourself, to save it for emergencies, to leave it to whoever you choose. You don't owe anyone access to your bank account just because you share a family tree. Here's a framework that helped dozens of my clients over the years. Decide right now on your absolute maximum for financial help, whether that's $500 a year or $5,000, whatever feels right for your situation. Once you hit that limit for any individual family member, you're done. No exceptions, no guilt. When they ask for more, you have a prepared response. I care about you, but I've reached my limit for helping financially this year. I'm happy to help you look for community resources or employment opportunities. That's it. You're not explaining, you're not justifying, you're stating a fact. The truth is this: someone who truly respects you won't keep asking you to sacrifice your security for their convenience. And if they get angry when you say no, that tells you everything you need to know about what they really value in the relationship.
This next family member is the hardest to identify because they rarely raise their voice. They're not dramatic, they don't ask for money, but somehow, after every interaction with them, you feel a little bit smaller, a little less capable, a little more doubtful about your own judgment. This is the invisible underminer. The invisible underminer has mastered the art of criticism disguised as concern. They question your decisions while pretending to help. They second-guess your choices while claiming they just want what's best. They make you feel incompetent while insisting they're being supportive. And the really dangerous part? They often don't even realize they're doing it. I worked with a 74-year-old woman named Margaret, who decided after her husband died that she wanted to travel. She'd never traveled much, but she'd always dreamed of seeing Europe. She was healthy, financially stable, excited about this new chapter. But her son, who visited every week, started planting seeds of doubt. Are you sure that's safe at your age? What if you fall? What if you get sick over there? Don't you think you should wait a few years until you're more settled? Every question sounded reasonable on the surface, but the message underneath was clear. You're not capable of making this decision. Margaret eventually canceled her trip, not because she couldn't do it, but because her son's constant questioning made her doubt herself. And 6 months later, when I asked her about it in one of our sessions, she started crying. Not tears of sadness, tears of anger. She said, "I let him convince me I was too old, too fragile, too incapable. And you know what? I'm none of those things." Here's what research on aging and autonomy tells us. The single biggest predictor of happiness and longevity after 60 isn't physical health or financial wealth, it's perceived control over your own life. When you feel like you're still in charge of your decisions, your mental health improves, your physical health improves, even your immune system functions better. But when family members constantly undermine your autonomy, even subtly, it has the opposite effect. You become more anxious, more depressed, more likely to experience cognitive decline.
The invisible underminer thrives on making you second-guess yourself, so the antidote is radical trust in your own judgment. You've lived 6, 7, 8 decades. You've made countless decisions, some good, some not so good, but you've survived them all and learned from them. You don't need anyone's permission to live your life the way you want. When the invisible underminer starts questioning your choices, try this response. I appreciate that you care, but I've thought about this carefully and I'm confident in my decision. You don't need to convince them. You don't need their approval. You just need to state your truth and move forward. And if they keep pushing, you can end the conversation entirely. Your mental peace is worth more than their unsolicited opinion.
Now we come to the family member who might surprise you most, the one who operates almost entirely through guilt. This is the emotional hostage taker, and they're experts at making you feel like you owe them something all the time. Their favorite phrases include classics like, "After everything I've done for you," and "I guess I'll just handle it myself," and the devastating, "I thought family was supposed to be there for each other." These statements are designed to do one thing: make you feel so guilty that you say yes to whatever they want, regardless of what it costs you. What makes the emotional hostage taker particularly dangerous after 60 is that many of us in this age group were raised with very strong messages about family duty and obligation. We were taught that you always help family, no matter what. You always show up. You always put family first. These aren't bad values in themselves, but the emotional hostage taker weaponizes them. They turn your values against you. Let me share what happened to a retired school teacher I counseled named Donald. He was 71, finally had time to pursue his passion for woodworking, had even converted his garage into a little workshop. But his sister called him constantly for favors: drive her to appointments, fix things at her house, watch her grandchildren, run her errands. And whenever Donald hesitated or said he had other plans, she'd sigh dramatically and say, "Well, I guess I know where I stand. Don't worry about it. I'll figure something out." That sigh, that tone, it was more powerful than any direct demand could ever be. Donald spent 2 years feeling perpetually guilty, perpetually obligated, perpetually exhausted. His woodworking tools gathered dust. He stopped making plans because he never knew when his sister would call with another crisis that he'd feel too guilty to refuse. And then something happened that changed everything. His sister got angry at him over something completely trivial and didn't speak to him for 3 months. And you know what Donald discovered during those 3 months? Peace. Real, deep, restful peace. He realized that the relationship had been one-sided for years, maybe decades. She took, he gave. She demanded, he complied. And all of it was held together by guilt. Here's what you need to understand about guilt. It's only effective if you accept it. The emotional hostage taker can try to make you feel guilty all day long, but you don't have to pick it up and carry it. When someone says, "After everything I've done for you," you can think to yourself, "Yes, and I appreciated that, but that doesn't mean I'm obligated to say yes forever." When they sigh and say they'll figure it out themselves, you can let them do exactly that. Healthy relationships don't keep score. They don't trade favors like currency. They don't make you feel like you're constantly in debt. If someone is using past kindness as a weapon to control your present choices, that's not love. That's manipulation. And you have every right to refuse it. Try this mental exercise. Imagine a good friend came to you and described this exact relationship dynamic. Someone in their family constantly making them feel guilty, constantly calling in favors, constantly implying they're not doing enough. What would you tell that friend? You'd probably say they need to set boundaries, right? You'd tell them they have a right to their own time and their own peace. So why don't you deserve that same advice? This family member is perhaps the trickiest to recognize because their behavior comes wrapped in kindness. They're helping you, they're taking care of things, they're making your life easier, or so they say. This is the control freak caregiver, and they're slowly taking over your life while calling it love. It usually starts innocently enough. Maybe you mentioned you're having trouble reading the fine print on medicine bottles, so they organize your medications. Or you said driving at night makes you nervous, so they start driving you to evening events. These are genuinely helpful things. But then something shifts. They start making decisions you didn't ask them to make. They start speaking for you in situations where you're perfectly capable of speaking for yourself. They start treating you like you're incapable, incompetent, unable to manage your own affairs. The difference between genuine help and controlling behavior comes down to one question: who's making the decisions? Real help empowers you. It supports your choices. It asks what you need and respects your answer. Controlling behavior, even when it's dressed up as caregiving, strips away your autonomy piece by piece until you wake up one day and realize you're not living your own life anymore. I knew a man named Frank, 79 years old, sharp as ever, still managing his own finances, still active in his church, still cooking most of his own meals. His daughter moved in after his wife passed, ostensibly to help him through the grief, but within 6 months, she'd taken over everything. She decided what he ate. She screened his phone calls. She told his friends he was too tired for visitors. She canceled his subscription to the newspaper because she said reading negative news was bad for his mental health. Frank became a ghost in his own home. When Frank finally came to see me, referred by his doctor who was concerned about his declining mood, he said something I'll never forget. He said, "I survived the Korean War, raised 4 kids, ran a successful business for 40 years, and buried the love of my life. But my own daughter treats me like I can't be trusted to butter my own toast." Here's what gerontology research shows us. The fastest way to accelerate cognitive decline in older adults is to remove their decision-making power. When you stop making choices, your brain stops working as hard. When everything is done for you, you lose the mental exercise that keeps you sharp. The control-freak caregiver thinks they're protecting you, but they're actually harming you. So how do you take your power back? You start small. You reclaim one decision at a time. Maybe you insist on choosing your own clothes, even if they think you're not matching properly. Maybe you make your own breakfast, even if it takes you longer. Maybe you plan your own day instead of following their schedule. And when they object, when they say they're just trying to help, you say clearly and firmly, "I appreciate your concern, but I need to make this decision for myself. I'm still capable, and I need you to respect that." If they truly care about you, they'll adjust. They'll step back. They'll find ways to help that don't involve taking over. And if they can't do that, if they insist on controlling everything, then you may need to have a much harder conversation about alternative living arrangements or reduced involvement in your daily life.
The last family member on this list doesn't drain you with demands or drama. They drain you with something more subtle and more poisonous: the constant implication that your life isn't good enough. This is the comparison competitor. You know them well. Every conversation becomes an opportunity for them to showcase how much better their life is than yours. You mention you're enjoying your daily walks, they're training for a marathon. You talk about your new hobby, they've already mastered it and moved on to something more impressive. You're proud of your grandchildren, but theirs are already learning 3 languages and playing violin. What makes this particularly harmful after 60 is that these are years when you're supposed to be finding contentment, not chasing achievement. You're supposed to be measuring your life by deeper metrics: the relationships you've nurtured, the wisdom you've gained, the peace you've found. But the comparison competitor keeps pulling you back into a race you never entered and can never win because the finish line keeps moving. The truth about the comparison competitor is they're usually deeply insecure themselves. All that showcasing, all that performing, it's not really about you. It's about them desperately needing external validation. But understanding their motivation doesn't mean you have to tolerate the damage it does to your own sense of contentment. Here's your antidote. Stop playing the game. When they start performing, when they start the subtle competition, you simply refuse to engage. You can say, "That's wonderful for you," and change the subject. You can share your own joy without defending it or comparing it to theirs. You can even just smile and let silence fill the space where they're expecting you to feel inadequate. Because here's what I want you to hear clearly. Your worth has nothing to do with how you measure up to anyone else. Your retirement doesn't need to look like a travel magazine. Your hobbies don't need to impress anyone. Your daily routine doesn't need to compete with anyone's highlight reel. If you wake up each morning with a sense of purpose, if you go to bed each night with a sense of peace, if you're treating people with kindness and taking care of your health, you're succeeding at the only game that actually matters. The comparison trap is especially dangerous now because we're surrounded by it on social media, in advertising, even in casual conversations. But you have the wisdom now to see through it. You've lived long enough to know that the person with the most impressive life on paper isn't always the happiest person in the room. In fact, they're often the loneliest. So the next time the comparison competitor starts their performance, I want you to mentally step back and ask yourself, am I happy with my life? Not compared to anyone else, just on its own terms. If the answer is yes, or even mostly yes, then you're exactly where you need to be. And if the answer is no, then the solution isn't trying to compete with someone else's life. It's making changes that align with your own values and desires. These 6 types of family members, the crisis manufacturer, the financial parasite, the invisible underminer, the emotional hostage taker, the control-freak caregiver, and the comparison competitor, they all have one thing in common. They take more than they give. They drain more than they fill. And after 60, when your energy is precious and your peace is essential, you simply cannot afford to keep giving pieces of yourself to people who never give anything back. Setting boundaries with family is never easy, but it's necessary. And it's not about being cruel or cutting people off. It's about protecting the life you've earned the right to enjoy. You've spent decades taking care of others, meeting obligations, putting family first. These years are yours. Claim them, protect them, and live them on your own terms.